everyone. It's really my great pleasure to be here. My name is Marlyne Sahakian, and I live in Geneva, Switzerland, where I'm professor of sociology. I run an institute called the Institute of Sociological Research. I did my master's in development studies. I spent a lot of time in the Philippines, in Manila, looking at energy usage. And I probably spent, I don't know, a good 15 years now studying energy from a social science perspective, from a sociology perspective. I also run a master's program, and I'm going to tell you more about it at the end because I would like to see more Armenian students apply to this master's program in Geneva. So, I realize this is right after lunch, so everyone is digesting. I have prepared slides, but at some point I might ask you to discuss amongst yourself or try and find ways to make the class more interactive since we don't know each other. Maybe not everyone is comfortable speaking out, so we'll take little moments to discuss in groups and to share. So what do I want to do with you today? I want to try and do two things. I want to convince you that the usual approach to changing energy usage is not the best approach. I want to show you how for all these years, these 15 years that I've been working on the energy transition, I've had to argue that individual rational approaches to energy are not sufficient. That telling people what to do, how to behave better is not sufficient. That we need to have a more sociological understanding of energy. And I also want to try and convince you that technological solutions are also not sufficient. It's great to have technology to make energy consumption more efficient, but we need even more than that. And I'm very curious to hear from you and about your experiences here in the Armenian context as well, which I'm not as familiar with. So first, what do we use energy for? Who can give me some examples of what we use energy for?
Heating our homes.
Heating our homes. And in the hot summer in Yerevan, air conditioning as well. Yeah. What else? Lights. Yeah.
Transportation.
Getting around.
Yeah. We're about to just set categories. It can be also producing other forms of energy. We use energy to convert it to other forms of energy.
True. Absolutely. Yeah. So we use energy for pretty much everything. We use energy for staying alive. We even use energy when we intake food and transform it into calories, right? So we are completely dependent on energy, and our economies are dependent on a certain kind of energy, fossil fuel-based energy mostly. So we use it to eat, to heat our homes, to move faster, and so many other things. And when you're looking at the consumption angle, you can also look out and say, well, there's all this direct energy we use, but there's also indirect energy or gray energy that is embodied in systems of provision. So when you drive your car, you're using fuel to move in your car, but energy was used to produce that car. But I guess you guys all know this already from the class. So when you consider how to move towards more sustainable forms of energy usage, there are different scales that you can consider. So here at the level of systems, you can look at sources of energy. Are they renewable or not? You can look at pollution, including climate change, et cetera, et cetera. What I want to focus on with you today, which is really my area of expertise, is the consumption level. And there are many different streams of research that are emerging here that are very relevant and interesting. Not least this question of energy poverty, energy justice. Have you heard of those terms? Have they come up in a little bit, maybe? So questions also around clean energy. And I'm going to focus a little bit more in this class on what energy means to everyday people and how we might encourage people to consume less. So I won't go into detail for all of these, but just a little highlight of what I see as emerging literature, emerging policy interest. I won't go into much detail, but for example, this notion of energy justice is becoming very important. We are currently putting together a European research project with some colleagues here, and energy justice is a central idea in this proposal, and it's the idea that not everyone will benefit from, not everyone benefits and is impacted by, I don't know, climate change in the same way. Not everyone has access to clean energy. Not everyone's voices are heard in the energy transition, et cetera, et cetera. This image speaks to the way fuel also renders gender inequalities apparent. How the use of certain fuels also relates to health issues. So this is a whole theme. Energy related to human development, energy related to justice. I'm not going to touch on it so much today, but I just wanted to show you how it is emerging. And what I did want to kind of focus in on, welcome, is the tension around sustainable energy usage. More often than not, we're told that we have to become more efficient in the way we use energy, right? So here you have different sources of light. We moved from incandescent light bulbs, and we're slowly moving towards, well, we went through this CFL passage. I don't know if it's still popular here, but now we're more in LED. So efficiency is a good thing, but oftentimes the unit of production that is becoming more efficient can lead people to consume more of that unit of production, what is called a rebound effect. Have you heard about this idea here? So I was in Manila when they banned incandescent lights, and they started to install CFLs. The problem with CFLs is that they take a long time for the gas to diffuse, and so the light is not as bright as when you switch on an incandescent light bulb. I don't know if did you remember this?
So is it like it's more efficient, but at the same time you consume less? Is that?
When you say more efficient, usually it means you're consuming less energy per unit of production. Absolutely, that's the idea. The idea was, this is not efficient, it uses a lot of energy. If we move to here, we will save energy. That was the idea. But what happened in reality is that people were replacing one incandescent light bulb, with maybe 2 or 3 CFL light bulbs. So then what happens? Do you get the energy savings that you anticipate?
No, actually you equalize.
That's a rebound effect. And why is it significant? It's significant because people don't care so much about energy. They care about having lights. And so they're going to try and find the same energy service, whether it takes 3 light bulbs or 1. Of course, now this LED generation is giving us a lot more light with a lot less energy usage. So we can say we become more efficient when it comes to lighting. And lighting is not the most significant category for energy usage. But what I try and explore in my work is how this idea of efficiency, which is a very engineering idea that we need to become more efficient with a unit of production, doesn't counter overall socio-cultural trends around what I call more, bigger, newer is better. And to do that, to illustrate why this is meaningful, I found this image that looks at the sizes of cars. So in Europe, in the United States, hopefully also in Armenia, I haven't looked at the data, cars have become more and more efficient per unit of production, right? But they've become bigger. They've become heavier, and there are more cars than ever before. So that energy savings that was anticipated has not come to be realized in absolute terms. You see what I mean? So this is one of the problems with efficiency. Did you want to talk in small groups about this notion of efficiency and why it's problematic, just to make sure you understand the concept? So what does efficiency mean to you? Or is it clear? It's clear. Because then I'm going to introduce another emerging theme that I work on quite a bit, and that is this idea of sufficiency. So for a long time, sufficiency was a bit of a bad word. So I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, the head of energy studies at the University of Geneva told me, Marlyne, why are you working on sufficiency? It's not even a topic. Just forget about it. It has become a topic, not least because it now has a definition in the IPCC report, on the sixth assessment report. Do you know what the IPCC reports are? This is when 200 and some scientists come together and agree on what they can ascertain with much conviction or lesser conviction when it comes to climate change, for example. So getting 2 researchers to agree is already a big deal. Here you have about 200 that agree, and they agreed to this footnote that says we also need to be thinking about sufficiency. And sufficiency is absolute reductions in energy usage. Avoiding demand is the way they define it. Now, how compelling is a sufficiency message in Armenia, do you think? Like, I'm sitting in Geneva, everyone is living in, a well-heated, well-insulated home, we all have public transport, we have access to healthcare, and we're saying, oh, we should embrace sufficiency, we should reduce consumption. How well do you think that resonates in places like Armenia or India? What do you think?
Yeah, in my opinion, it is not particularly unpopular to say that in here because, we have a problem with that. We cannot think of it if we don't have the reason to think of it.
And why? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, because we're not as stable as other countries mentioned. So we should think about not sufficiency, but how to have it.
Right. It's sort of this idea that, well, we're still developing,
Yeah.
right? We still need to reach that peak of consumption. So while in the Western world people are saying, oh my God, we've peaked at consumption, we have everything we need, and yet we know that this has huge environmental impacts, but who are we to tell others you must reduce, right? That's what you're getting at. Do other people agree? Do you think that this is problematic, this idea of sufficiency? Yeah? So you can disagree. There are multiple opinions and multiple perspectives. So one thing that the IPCC report, someone had
In a sense, strategical thinking or thinking more broadly is the right thing. However, to be able to not only nurture that culture of that sufficiency, having a reduction in the consumption is a good idea. Maybe we should not only provide people with the opportunities, the technology, the thinking and stuff, to be able to realize that, but also, I think through education, try to inject those ideas. But I think it will take more than decades, but if there is a name to do that, and there is an investment, maybe that could really happen, and that would become the norm rather than the exception.
You put your finger on so many important points. One is this normative dimension. We live in consumer societies, right? You cannot walk in the streets of Yerevan without seeing advertising, without seeing, fancy cars going by. The media echoes this idea. And this is an idea, I'll get to it later, that was very prominent in the Second War period. The final end of development for thinkers such as Rostov, who were thinking of stages of economic development after the Second World War, was mass consumption. It was this idea that every nation has to achieve 2 cars, a house, a refrigerator, and that that's what it means to live a good life.
American dream.
The American dream. But it's powerful, isn't it? It's vehicled through, sitcoms, through cultural different characters. Yeah. So what if I told you that sufficiency is also about well-being? Sufficiency is also sort of this idea of living less with less, but living better. And that's another kind of dynamic, but I'll get to a bit more of that in a second. This idea of reductions in sufficiency relates to energy in different ways. One way I thought of illustrating it is through this idea of a 15-minute city. I don't know if you've heard of this idea. It's the idea that, and now some people are saying the 8-minute city. Someone always wants to go be more try even harder. So the idea is that within 15 minutes, you should be able, through walking or biking or some form of slow, non-fuel, other than caloric fuel form of mobility, you should be able to access quality food, education, etc., etc. Does that not look a little bit like the center of Yerevan? And in a way, Yerevan is a perfect example of a 15-minute city for people that live inside Yerevan. But what about the suburbs? And how does everyone else get into that center? And what does that imply in terms of mobility, etc.?
Actually, I think the perfect example of the city is Moscow, because in Moscow, in every district, you have everything, and a lot of people they live in their districts, and sometimes they go to the center, but they have everything in their district. So yeah.
See, I'm not familiar with Moscow. But so several different centers. That's the idea that you're proposing. Yeah.
It's not several different. Like Moscow has 20 districts, and in every district you have everything.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So sufficiency would be about making all of these services accessible in a way that reduces the need for energy for transport, for example. But you can already see in my example of Yerevan that it can pose problems in terms of inequality. So for example, Amsterdam is often given as the illustration of a bike-friendly city. To live in center of Amsterdam, or Copenhagen for that matter, you need a lot of money. And there's still people that come in from the suburbs, there are highways with cars, etc. So it's not, so far maybe the Moscow example we have to look at a bit more. But yeah, this idea of reducing consumption has to work for everybody. You can't just work for the privileged few who can live in a downtown area, take their bike to work, etc. I haven't seen so many bicycles in Yerevan. Is it an emerging trend or?
No.
It is dangerous.
Too dangerous, right?
Yerevan doesn't have this bike roads, and also one time I loved riding a bike. When I lived in Moscow, I did it almost like every day when the weather was okay. So basically here I tried to rent a bike. It was like the most awful experience of my life. I think I would die because literally it's like there is no place to ride in Yerevan.
Right. And you can walk in Yerevan. You can barely walk in Yerevan. So what dominates in Yerevan?
Cars.
Yeah. And I live in Geneva, that is a very wealthy city. And we have an annual car fair, and I always say that Geneva has a car culture, for sure, but I've never seen as many fancy cars as in Yerevan. It's crazy. What are these Maybach, I don't know, Rolls, I don't even know what they're all called, but it's insane, no? Talk about status, distinction, and we'll come back to these questions. So anyway, sufficiency is this idea that we need to reduce our energy usage, but how do we do it? And how do we counter these cultural trends? And how does it reflect the way our cities are organized? These are all big questions. I'm just going to show this slide very briefly to tell you that with some scholars we've been working on this concept of a consumption corridor. I assure you it is not yet very popular in the policy arena, but that's what science does sometimes. We propose things that are not yet realistic, but they're ideas that are maybe other that will be picked up. So it's this idea that current levels of consumption are, in many instances, excessive. And that excess, maybe it doesn't matter. Like, who cares if people have private jets and huge cars and whatever? Maybe it doesn't matter, right? But if it is imperiling the ability of everyone to live a good life, then it does matter. Then it becomes a justice question. So this proposal is saying, what are the lower limits of consumption, below which people cannot live a good life? And what are the upper limits of consumption, above which overconsumption is prohibiting everyone from living a good life? And this has direct implications in terms of how we consume energy. So I'm just going to throw this out there. We'll come back to it near the end, but it's a way of thinking about sufficiency, a way of thinking about what is enough and what is too much. And we often ask the question of what is enough. So there are many policies that exist that say people need minimum level of education, people need minimum access to healthcare, people need minimum access to energy, below which we have energy poverty. People think about that lower limit all the time. But do we think about the upper limit? That is, right? That's like the no-go zone. Telling people to not consume above an upper limit is problematic. Would you agree? Yeah? Do you start seeing it a little bit or no? I've noticed in the media, there's a little bit more of this, what example can I give? Jeff Bezos' wedding in Venice. I mean, it was been ambiguous in the media. Like on the one hand, oh yes, wonderful, but on the other hand, a lot of negative media about this excessive display of wealth. What do you think? No?
Well, actually, there is a very simple carte blanche to it. If I put, my foot in their shoes, is that it's their basic right to basically treat their property however they want.
Right.
And sometimes you can't even argue with that. But I mean, again, trying to urge people not to consume too much, there should be a basis for that, or at least a substitute. If I don't consume too much, what's gonna be? What's the benefit? Yeah, what's the benefit? What's the price? And it all comes to that thinking, all comes to that resource management, which needs to be kind of addressed from top to bottom, rather than I think the opposite.
Does it matter? Does it matter that people overconsume certain forms of energy? Does it matter? What do you think? Back row people, what do you think? If some people consume a lot of energy, does it matter?
Of course.
Why?
Because the resources they're limited,
Right.
just to an extent.
Yeah, exactly. Non-renewable resources are limited. I'll come to your hand in a second. So I love the example of carbon offsetting. You buy a flight and the airline says, would you like to offset your carbon? And I compare it to the Middle Ages, when you would pay to have souls leave purgatory to go into heaven or hell. It's sort of like, well, we hope it works, but we're not really sure. So yes, you can plant a tree, and a tree can absorb a certain amount of carbon emissions, depending on its life stage. But that's a liter of kerosene or gasoline that you're never going to get back. So it's a non-renewable resource, you're right. And even if it's nuclear energy, we have the question of the waste management of nuclear. I think the Yerevan nuclear facility to the north, is it to the north or the south of the city?
Even Metamor?
Isn't it one of the oldest in the world? I think it's from the
maybe-
70s.
Yeah, it was built during the Soviet, but it's west to Europe.
Okay, west, yeah. So that's going to be, so far there's nuclear energy is an important energy source of Armenia, is that right?
Yes.
So then the phasing out of nuclear, what are the implications for that? But still, hugely problematic to move out of what you were saying is this cultural mindset of more is better. More is always better, bigger is always better, newer is always better.
At least if we could urge those people to maybe the part which is already crossing the edge, like the part, allow them to store it somewhere, which is another huge problem, storing energy. Maybe that could also be part of the solution.
Yeah, there's also the idea of carbon capture, right, and storage that is in many energy transition plans, including the Swiss energy transition. I took this picture because it's a picture on visiting Yerevan and it involves food. And why did I choose it? Because I'm now moving to the part of my talk where I want to convince you that using energy is not just about upper and lower limits. It has some kind of cultural significance, some kind of social significance. So when people share a meal, do you think they're thinking about energy? So you wake up in the morning, you turn on the lights, you make your coffee, you eat a meal, you go to school. All of that uses energy, but it is invisible. it is very much devoid of meaning. And that's one of the reasons that makes this question of energy consumption so problematic. In Europe, the invasion of Ukraine made energy meaningful again. I think since the 70s, we've never had so much media attention around energy security. Why? Switzerland was dependent on Russian gas up to 40 or 50%. So suddenly it became a geopolitical and a security issue. But most people, as they go about their daily lives, don't think so much about energy. Would you agree? Yeah. It sort of arrives in our plugs. We use it for everything, but we're not.
I mean, sometimes it's even inherent in the human nature, speaking sociology.
Yeah. It's
Where
even
you
what,
have
sorry?
It's inherent in the human nature, speaking sociologically. Kind of when you have the scarcity, it's the time when you try already evaluate the dire need of that resource.
Right, when there's a risk, when there's some kind of disruption,
I wouldn't really say we don't think about energy because you pay for electricity. You, to an extent, of course, each and every one of us thinks of energy, but not in the context that the people that specialize in the field of food. So usually you pay people who think about energy more to take care of it, I guess.
Yeah. But you know, you're raising a very important point on the cost of energy. Let me see if I come to it. Yeah, I'll come to it in a moment. I'll come back to that point in a second. Because the price of something can also indicate whether it's meaningful or not. Absolutely. So what I wanted to maybe suggest is this current in energy studies, at least as it relates to consumption, that says, let's not just think about energy, let's think about the services that energy provides. That's what's important to people. Getting around, preparing a meal, this is what's relevant, and then maybe we can work through that to find ways to make either energy consumption more efficient or to reduce consumption efficiency. Hi, welcome.
Nice.
We did a study in Switzerland over a number of years, and the idea was that, wow, how do we get people to reduce their energy usage? And we found, this was before the war in Ukraine, that what people did care about was health, well-being, which is a slightly broader remit than health, comfort, connectivity, convenience. All of these things really matter to people. So for example, if I tell you we need to replace your transit in a car with public transport. You're going from A to B, currently you drive a car, we're replacing that route with a bus, go ahead and move from the car to the bus. Will people make that transition? No, because they will not have the same comfort and convenience, potentially, with public transport that they have with the car. And unless public transport addresses these kinds of meanings that are important to people, then it's probably not going to be so successful. What do you think? Bogota has a really nice example in Colombia of how they introduced buses, more like middle upper class public transport in the city of Bogota, where they created dedicated bus lanes and they made the seats so that people could work from their seat in the bus. So it was a way of attracting people who were going to be comfortable, have connectivity. Somehow there was like, they could have some internet access available, and they could work. So suddenly the bus became an attractive way for people to move from point A to B. They're no longer stuck in traffic behind their wheels, but actually maybe working in transit. But I think because they were able to address things that were meaningful to people.
So one example in Yerevan would be that if you're in the traffic, with car you have much more flexibility. You can go through all the small streets that maybe even Google Maps does not know. But if you're stuck in public transportation in the traffic, then you're stuck. And then the way that they've been trying to partially solve it is through introducing separate bus lanes.
That would make it more efficient. But then everyone who drives a car would have to not use those bus lanes, right?
Yes.
There would have to be like some serious monitoring in Yerevan of that.
Compatibility.
Other people in Manila, and interviews I did in Manila, which is such a car-based city. So in Manila, if I wanted to do in-depth interviews, which last about an hour and a half, I would ask people, can I ride with you in the car? Because I knew it would take about an hour and a half or 2 hours to get from point A to point B. Crazy traffic. And there people would say, but my car is an extension of my home. Like it is my private space where I carry things that are important to me. People, stuff, etc. And that's difficult to replace with public transport for some. Okay, what else did I have here? A very fancy graph from the IPCC report, the Sixth Assessment Report. You don't need to look at it in great detail. It's just that for a sociologist, to see a bunch of climate scientists get together and say, we have to consider socio-cultural factors when it comes to climate change and thus energy usage, for us was like a big win. So what are they saying in these graphs? They're basically saying that if we want to reduce the carbon emissions from food, nutrition, some of it has to do with infrastructure use. So notably, the way we transport food from production through distribution to supermarkets, food loss along the way is contributing a little bit to climate, to carbon emissions. But the big chunk of reduction potential is what they call socio-cultural factors. So why is that? Because how many people here are vegetarian? Okay. So when you go to an Armenian, baptism, or an Armenian wedding, what is the role of meat? It's
the role of meat is like very important, culturally, and we don't even need to go to such feasts to be like, oh, there's nothing to eat. You can go to a cafeteria where your only option are carbs. Even though you bring your message, we can hear about this like 800 times, so yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
It also, from a feminist standpoint, it has been historically very connected to masculinity and masculine power.
Yeah.
So it is very
barbecue, right? It is so culturally important, isn't it? And I remember coming with vegetarians to Armenia some years ago, and they would say at a restaurant, I don't eat meat. And they would say, oh, it's okay, we have chicken. It's like, we don't eat it all. And it's difficult for vegetarians in Armenia. So meat is so cultural, it's so symbolic, isn't it? And it's difficult to counter that. So at the University of Geneva, there is a cafeteria that is a vegetarian cafeteria, but they don't publicize it. Like, they're not like, hey, we're only vegetarian, because they didn't want to make a big deal about it, but everything there is vegetarian. And in a way, it serves as a kind of demonstration site for people who maybe don't have a lot of experience eating vegetarian meals, to see what a balanced meal looks like if it's vegetarian. Yeah.
There's also this strange aversion to vegetarian foods that a lot of people I've noticed have. Yeah, they'll look at a menu or something, a dish, and if they notice that it's vegetarian, all of a sudden, even though it's almost identical to the same dish that has meat in it, they suddenly have this like aversion or disgust to it, even though it's really not that vegetarian.
Resistance. Yeah.
I don't know where it stems from, but there's also this factor.
Yeah. So a very famous French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu looked at these kind of dynamics, and he says that there is something like a norm. You were saying before, there's a norm in society. And when you counter that norm, it can go one of two ways. Let me give you an example. There was a big campaign back in the days when I was living in New York City. There was a big anti-fur campaign. So I think it was like Christy Turlington or some top model was huge posters in the city saying, I'd rather go naked than wear fur. Anti-fur, right? So animal rights, etc., etc. The backlash against that was huge. The next season, I'm not a big follower of fashion trends, but apparently all the big designers were like, fur all the way. Like, we're not being told what to do. Fur has always been a way people have used, to stay warm. So there can be these backlashes. That's what Bourdieu would say. He would say, a norm, it'll either be reinforced or maybe it'll move towards what he calls heterodoxy. And sometimes it kind of goes back and forth for a while before the norm really moves in one direction. So in Switzerland, the meat is also central. Dairy products also, Swiss cheese, you know, I'm sure you've heard the fondue and all this kind of stuff. And little by little, more and more vegetarian options are becoming normalized, but we're still very far away from vegetarian diets. But to my point here, that the changes that these scientists are now expecting are not efficiency changes to systems of distribution. They're saying we need to work on social and cultural norms. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, as a sociologist, I find that technology is also social. So, but I'm not gonna argue with them.
Isn't it also a question of status?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, for example, in Brazil, so in Brazil, if you can eat meat every day, means that you are well off, right?
Yeah.
And otherwise you're going to eat chicken and then eggs and then
Absolutely.
right? And but now there is a trend to make the vegetarian more, or the organic
Right.
more
Yeah.
organic. It's not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
vegetarian, but also a measure of status or a
Yes.
sign of status.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is a little bit of transition.
Right, yeah. And before getting to that transition, it can go both ways. The anti-SUV campaign in America, huge backlash by SUV drivers saying, no, it's about independence and that. So it kind of goes both ways and maybe slowly moves in another direction. But yeah, Bourdieu also theorized this idea of class distinction and class competition, and the idea that how you consume is a reflection of social class, and that some of it is very aspirational. So if you have the right car and the right telephone and you're wearing the right brands, etc., that you adhere to a certain social status. Definitely. We'll come back to some examples of that later. So what I wanted to do for this part of the class is share with you, now that we've done this kind of intro, I wanted to share with you different ways of thinking about reducing energy usage. So different ways of thinking about how we could maybe move towards this idea of sufficiency, consuming less. I remember I told you at the beginning, solutions are always dominated by the idea that technology should be more efficient, and we've already said that that can be problematic, because then you just consume more of it. But I also told you that I'm constantly fighting against individual behavior change as the main way of thinking about change. So I wanted to critique that with you, okay? So can you tell me a little bit about how you get your energy bills in Yerevan? How you pay your electricity bills? How does it work? So here is a bill from Manila. And what you have is the kilowatt hours per month. It's not broken down by appliance, but it's broken down by household, right? Whilst in Switzerland, you don't have any of that. You just have one number, an amount for electricity and gas and water that are separate.
So in Manila, they provide kind of mini statistics?
They do, and do you know why?
Why?
Labor is cheap. So they have people going out every month reading meters. We only do it once a year in Switzerland. They do it every month in Manila for households. Yeah. And in Yerevan or in Armenia, how does it work? Your electricity bill. What does it break down?
Just a few.
Do you know?
You just get one number. It's per month you get the total amount.
And do they show how it changes month per month? No?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately, no.
They might at some point, who knows. And is it expensive?
Electricity?
Yeah.
I think cheaper than Europe.
It's more expensive than in Russia, but not significantly.
Not significantly. Okay. So when we did a survey, a representative survey in Switzerland, asking people if they knew the amount of their energy bills, only some 20% of the people could say with exactitude how much they're paying per month, because energy is not expensive enough. The person who left had that point earlier. She was talking about price. In Manila, energy is not subsidized. It's among the most expensive kilowatt hours in the world. It's as expensive as Hawaii. So energy is very expensive, and you're in a tropical country, it's very hot. People have their air conditioning units on timers to do 2 hours when you're going to bed, 2 hours when you wake up in the morning. The middle classes are not blasting air conditioning through central cooling in their homes. It's a unit approach. People share sleeping areas to save money sometimes, to stay cool in one bedroom rather than have people use air conditioning in different bedrooms. So a very, an approach to energy that is much more careful than what you have, for example, in Switzerland. What about here? Are you mindful about how much air conditioning you use, or it doesn't matter?
I think it doesn't matter in most cases.
For many people, it doesn't matter. Maybe if we were to leave American University and go to other areas, it would be more, for less, more underprivileged groups. Maybe it would be more significant.
I think it depends on those studies.
Yeah.
And definitely thinking, but
yeah. So great diversity in how people relate to how they understand energy and the cost of energy. But when you think about it, this energy bill is one of the only ways that your energy provider communicates with you. So an individual rational approach is saying, based on getting this letter, I'm going to reduce my consumption, which is completely unrealistic, right? Because first of all, we've all just already concluded that we barely know how much we're paying. And we've already also said that energy is not as significant as the services it provides. So there are many reasons why this kind of rational choice model of, let's break down and tell people how much they're consuming and then they might consume less is probably not the best way of reducing our energy usage. What do you think? You're allowed to protest. Another way of thinking about reducing energy usage is looking at energy labels. Do you have energy labels on products?
yes.
And it looks like this, right? It's from the European. Okay. So this is one I took in Manila about, 10 years ago. Energy guide, 11.5. What does that mean? Nobody knows what that means. Some obscure engineer understands what that means. So clearly this one is better. Here we're moving more towards a nudging approach where we're like, green is better, red is worse, so we know we're up here. But you know what these labels do that's a little bit tricky and takes us back to the efficiency-sufficiency debate? They always compare the same volume. So for example, this is a 155-liter fridge with 54 liters for cooling. It'll say that it is more or less energy efficient as a fridge the exact same size. No one at any point is telling you, actually, you could have a much smaller fridge and you would consume less. Same thing for cars. It's always the same category of product that's being proposed. Anyway, fun fact. So energy labels, great to have, but maybe not enough to reduce our energy usage. Timers and smart meters, do these exist? Yeah? Do you use them on appliances or, yeah? The research that I've seen coming out of the UK suggests that they are a good starting point, that a lot of people want more information about how they use energy and how different appliances use energy. But after that initial, this is cool and innovative, people sort of normalize this, and it is not as useful over the long term. Another study showed that when people start comparing their energy usage between themselves, they may not necessarily reduce or increase based on those kinds of comparisons. At least that was a UK study. What do you think of these kinds of meters? Useful, but maybe not revolutionary.
Necessary but insufficient.
Very good. I'm going to use that next time. Necessary but insufficient.
Yeah.
This is more about how buildings are designed also towards energy efficiency. I'm going to skip this because I see time is ticking and I want to get us to this slide. I love this example of a tower that went up in Manila while I was there. It's called the AUA Center, and it's a very energy efficient building. Again, my big critique of energy efficiency, right? So it uses low emissivity glass, which basically includes glass with a kind of ceramic lacing, which means that 60% of heat that is coming onto the building surface is deflected off the building. So the building is super efficient, but all of that heat bounces off the building and goes into the lobby of a 5-star hotel directly in front that has to increase its air conditioning to offset this gas.
Even that building in London that was kind of a setting of fire.
Yes.
On fire.
This one set a car on fire because of the heat that was really released off the source. So it's a critique of thinking about efficiency only at the level of a unit. Be it a car, be it a light bulb, or be it a building, we always need to be considering slightly broader dynamics. So I wanted to just end on that for this part. And now I'm going to go into some fun stuff. This is about rebound effects. I don't think it's so useful. We covered it. A direct rebound is when you use the same product but more of it. Indirect is you save energy on the product, but you spend money elsewhere. Like let's say you save energy on your car because it's energy efficient, but you use those savings to buy a ticket to Hawaii, and etc. I'm not going to go into all of this detail because I want to get to some of this fun stuff. So I've spent a lot of time looking at energy usage from a social and cultural dimension. And one thing I noticed, looking at the Philippines, for example, is that actually culture and status has a lot to do with energy usage. So here you have the cover of Philippine Tatler. Do you know this Tatler magazine? It's kind of the rich and famous magazine. There's an American Tatler and there's this Filipino Tatler. And here you are, it's the Christmas issue. You have a Filipino couple. So it's 40 degrees outside, 80% humidity. What's going on? What are they doing?
The fireplace.
Yeah. And why? Why are they in front of a fireplace in a sweater?
It's Christmas.
It's Christmas. So understandings and expectations around seasonality imported from the West influence the way elites in Manila use energy usage. They don't care about the cost of electricity at this. They don't care about air conditioning per se, but they need the source of air conditioning, which is cold air, to be able to dress a certain way at Christmas. What I noticed doing fieldwork among elites in Manila, when the fall-winter season comes, they wear fall-winter fashion from the runways of Paris, Milan, etc. So they have to pump up air conditioning to be able to have, their Chanel, woolen, whatever, their, Longma, I don't know what is fashionable, but, to wear their cashmere and all this, to adhere to this idea of fashion elsewhere. This is what a traditional pre-air conditioning Filipino shirt looks like. It's made from pineapple weave, and it was like a naturally cool shirt. But people more and more, at least among these elites, are dressing a certain way and are able to do so because of air conditioning. So that's a way of thinking of energy usage as cultural and symbolic. Another picture from my fieldwork. This is a model home. What do you see in this model home? A 4x4 car of some sort. So do you know what a model home is? It's what you build to sell other properties that are similar. So it's the house that people visit. So this house, these windows don't open, so there's no possibility of passive ventilation. And you have an air conditioning unit right in the front of the house. So I asked the retail developer, I said, why is it here? And he says, well, people want to show that they can afford an air conditioning unit. It's a form of status in the Philippines. I know, weird, right? Someone told me once, I was presenting this in Japan, they said, oh yeah, there are some Japanese households that put fake air conditioning units outside, just to show that they can afford it. It's strange, no? So air conditioning as a form of status. And if you go to these kinds of tropical climates, I don't know what it's like in Latin America, but in Manila, the status of a shopping mall will be directly correlated to the temperature. So if you're going to a shopping mall that sells Cartier, Prada, whatever, it's 13 degrees. in there. And if you're going to more of a lower income shopping mall, it's like 20 degrees or 22 degrees.
This air conditioner, does it literally blow outside?
Oh no, the way air conditioning works is air conditioning releases heat outside.
Oh, okay.
Then has a refrigeration system to cool
I
inside.
thought it was like the one they had inside, just outside.
No, I think because yours are split here in Yerevan, you have split systems, right? These are one unit. There's no split system, and the big problem with air conditioning, all air conditioning, is that it releases a lot of hot air into outdoor areas, contributing to the urban heat island effect. So moving massively to aircon also means overheating cities, which are, why do cities get hot in the summer? What are some of the factors? Okay, the sun, but what else?
There are no trees.
What else? Trees.
In urban areas, buildings absorb heat.
Buildings, exactly. The cement, and also cars. Did someone say cars? Cars give off heat, and air conditioning gives off a lot of heat. So all of these things contribute to cities that are less livable. But here I'm trying to show the symbolic quality of energy usage. This is what a post-World War II building looked like in Manila before air conditioning became the norm. These brise soleil were taken from the Brazilian examples. So they naturally deflected heat from coming inside. But these kinds of buildings are being torn down today in Manila. These glass high-rises are going up because, as an architect told me, West is best. We want buildings that look like Western high-rises. This is Pinong. He is an overseas worker. The Philippines actively encourages people to leave their country and work overseas because of all of the remittances that get sent back. So Filipinos work on a lot of cruise ships as nurses, etc., as nannies, etc. And this is a very low-income housing community where I did research. It's next to a landfill, and it's called Paradise Heights, which is an interesting choice of name. And they live on a mezzanine that is maybe like, I don't know, their whole house is probably a quarter of this room. And they have no passive ventilation. So he has installed the first air conditioning unit in this area. And he's a very happy man. And I use this slide to show that if we're serious about energy usage, we have to think about the structural conditions that allow some people to stay cool while others can barely live if they don't have this kind of service. Passive cooling is becoming a little more popular in the Philippines, so people are thinking about how opening spaces, putting holes in certain areas allows for heat to how to cool spaces without aircon. Is it a topic in Armenia?
Utopic, you mean?
Utopic. You need to be writing the scripts for my classes. Another example from Manila and Japan is about how the way we use energy to stay cool also relates to clothing standards. So this is a secretary in an office in Manila, and she's obliged to dress this way. So she has the hose and the polyester dress, so it's 40 degrees outside, 80% humidity, but she can dress this way because of air conditioning. And even before Fukushima, you know what Fukushima is, right? The disaster in Japan. Even before, the Japanese environmental minister launched a campaign called Cool Biz. And the idea was to get people to dress down, to not necessarily wear long sleeve shirts or jackets, so that Japanese offices could use less energy on air conditioning. And it worked really well. All of the department stores launched Cool Biz outfits, but it's very specific to the Japanese culture that such a top-down initiative would work well. The Italians tried something similar. So there was an Italian utility company that said, oh, we should all take off our ties and jackets to not have to cool offices, and they were ridiculed in the press. Like, oh, like taking a tie off is going to save us from climate change. You know, the Italians, their pride in clothing is also, you know, their sense of fashion and style is such. So it doesn't work in every context. But I'm just showing you how cooling also has to do with cultural and social expectations around proper attire, what it means to be dressed in a professional way or not. I know that in this class you have a historical perspective to energy usage, and now you've been looking across history at how energy is evolving. And I wanted to point to this particular period in time, the post-war era, because as I mentioned earlier, there was this discourse around development that the final goal of all development was consumerism, was understood as consumerism. And the Americans in particular, in their post-World War II glory, really were pushing for these American ideals to be transmitted, and they did it in many different ways. They had the Museum of Modern Art had this traveling exhibition across Europe on what household design items should look like, and there were a lot of fairs where modern ways of living were presented. So this was one such fair. Here you were in 1954 in Paris. So you would go to these fairs and you would visit the kitchen of the future, the home of the future. Do you have such a thing in Armenia? This kind of presentation of, not really, huh? Maybe now when you go into shops, certain shops, they might present the future kitchen a little bit, right? Maybe not so much? Okay. So it was a big deal back in that time, and here you have a feminist, an actress, who's sitting, reading her newspaper, while presumably dinner is cooking itself. So she's in heels, she's in this nice dress. And the message that was being communicated at this time was modernization is tied to progress, is tied to job creation, economic development, all those things. But it's also tied to women's liberation. Women are going to be freed of all these chores because now dinner is cooking itself. The clothes are being washed by themselves in washing machines. So what do you think about this promise? Do you think that all of these energy-using technologies that we brought into the home, we talked about the industrialization of the home because suddenly, this is the 1950s, but today, you have people that have personal cinemas in their home, you have people that have bread makers or vein makers, you name it, right? Every appliance in the world. So what do you think that has done to this idea of, or ideal, that it was going to save women time?
It's like making human labor into another type of labor, creating energy. So, like replacing human energy with electricity.
That was absolutely the selling proposition. And I think the washing machine for clothing has saved an incredible amount of time, particularly for women who used to take a full day just to wash by hand and all of this. So of course, very labor intensive.
Social and marketing influence at that time, if we're talking about it, it was like at that time people were trying to save energy, companies would try to make it easier for women and people. So marketing influence has those in place.
There was huge marketing efforts. If you were a housewife living at this time and you didn't have the latest vacuum cleaner, you felt terrible about yourself. Like you hadn't yet acquired these consumer goods that symbolized what a good life was all about. But let me ask you something. Do you think that it really saved women's time today? So the argument, the feminist argument, looking back on this era was, so it's one argument, you may or may not agree, but the argument is we created more meanings around the home and lifestyle that probably did exist before, more expectations around what it means to be a good housewife, And so no one is sitting and reading a paper while dinner cooks itself. Because now we're not just cooking dinner. We're making sorbet, we're doing this, we're doing that, and doing other things that our ancestors were definitely not doing, or maybe they did it all the time, I don't know. But certainly we haven't, we're still very busy. The machines are doing a lot, but this promise that will just liberate time for women has not come to fruition. So most all societies, care work and homework is gendered. More women engage in such work, but of course it's changing, and I'm sure many men in this room are more and more engaging in such work. Yes? No? Maybe? Soon? Any comments on this period? Yeah? Okay. Here is a picture of appliances that I've seen in elite households in Switzerland. And I want to show them because oftentimes we say, yeah, energy is not significant, appliances are not significant, they don't have like cultural value. But I think more and more they are, and I could have maybe shown like an espresso machine, there's certain appliances that actually do communicate status. And this is a very fancy stove that is usually used in restaurants, but now people have it in their home. This is a double dishwasher. Have you ever seen such a thing?
Double dishwasher?
Yeah. So it is not normal, I reassure you. It's not something I've encountered a lot, but in some elite households where the kitchen has become a space for receiving, and it's no longer a hidden space where domestic workers are preparing meals and bringing them out. It's sort of a space of performance. And in that context, if you have room, you have a double dishwasher because you don't want a single dirty spoon on your counter. Everything, it's tied to meanings around cleanliness and order and things like this. But problematic in terms of energy usage. So that machine may be very efficient, but now you have two of them and sometimes they're running at the same time.
I have an impression about dishwashers that they double the work, but you still do the work because you still have to.
Yes, exactly.
Rewash it, and then you take the time, and you could do it in. So that's interesting. Too. But how does it come to? Because is the technology that is not ready, or the people that are not ready? Because I actually wash all my dishes by hand, and sometimes I put in the dishwasher.
Right, yeah. So you're right about time, because the studies that we've done with households, asking them how much time do you spend doing the dishes, or how much time do you spend doing laundry? The first answer is, oh, I don't spend any time, the machine does it. I press a button, but for laundry, we estimated that laundry takes about an hour, because you have to sort the clothes, then you have to load, then you have to unload, maybe you hang to dry, or you put it in the dryer, then you iron, then you put away. So that whole cycle is actually taking an hour of your time. So I had it, regardless of how long the machine is taking, right? So we had a project to get people to reduce their energy usage by doing less laundry, and one of the arguments we had was it would save time. And we did some visioning with the people around dishwashers, and they imagined dishwashers of the future that would be shelves. So they thought, rather than taking it out of the dishwasher and putting it away, that you would just eat and put it back on the shelf and clean. But this was a future visioning session, but to get around that, the extra work of. I need to jump ahead a little bit. I wanted to tell you in the last few minutes that we have, because I'm supposed to end in 5 minutes.
I think 10 minutes.
10?
Yeah.
Because he has some messages for you also. So all of this has been to take us to this point where I wanted to tell you that I work not only to understand why people use energy, why is it significant, how can we, consume less, but I do a lot of research that is action-oriented and that is aiming towards changing energy usage some way. We did a review of some 1,000 initiatives in Europe. So we worked with NGOs across many different European countries, and we asked them, how do you try to change energy usage in your energy consumption in your countries. And the vast majority, some 70%, is about changing technologies or changing individual behavior through information campaigns. So it's basically change your light bulb or turn off the lights when you leave a room. That's like the big, 70% of stuff that's happening around energy. But we were interested in this more complex understanding. How can we change energy while understanding that energy is cultural and symbolic, understanding all of the meanings around energy, understanding how energy relates to everyday life. So this is what I've been doing for a number of years, and I don't think I'll have time to go through all the slides, but we came up with a typology where we said, there are all these examples of change initiatives that are individual. There are all these there are less, but nonetheless, examples of energy changing initiatives that are about social and cultural dimensions. And in both cases, they are more or less participatory. They more or less involve people as participants in this change initiative. So I believe you will have the slides. I won't have time to go through all of them. But this type 1, which is changing individual behavior, a type 1 example is an example in Switzerland where the utility company goes and knocks on people's doors and says, hi, we're here to offer you free light bulbs that are more energy efficient, and look at how much you consume, and here's how you can reduce your consumption. Not bad, why not? But of course, I'm a critical social scientist, so we followed them around and we uncovered all these interesting dynamics, like a Palestinian guy who answered the door and was like, I know how to save energy, I'm from Palestine, where energy is super expensive, don't come and tell me what to do. Or an old woman who was resisting being categorized as poor, like, oh no, I don't need your light bulb, you keep it, don't you? And one major critique we made of this program is that they were knocking on doors of people that were low income. And there's a good reason to do that, because maybe these people want to save energy. But at no point were they knocking on doors of wealthy people and saying, can we come in and change your light bulbs? So we critiqued it a little bit that way. I'm not going to go through all the examples. I'm just going to make a selection, I think. There are many examples of broader initiatives to change energy usage. Things like transition towns, where at the level of an entire town, citizens come together to think about how to promote more renewable energy production, how to reduce their consumption. There are these methods called carbon conversations, which are again about bringing citizens together, having discussions around how to reduce energy usage and limit carbon emissions, these kinds of things, which involve something more than an information campaign. They involve real debates, deliberation, tensions, contestation, and all of that. And then I wanted to show you a few fun things that I've done. So one was the Gene Challenge. It's a little project. It was a little project. It was fun. We went into a community and we recruited about, maybe 15 people. And we asked them if they would be willing to wear the same pair of jeans for 4 weeks. And it was interesting because some people were like, what do you mean 4 weeks? I wear my jeans for like 3 months, And then other people were like, 4 weeks? I wear my jean once and I washed it. So there were this huge variety. And so anyway, people joined the challenge, and they started sharing online all the different ways of keeping their jean clean. So the first 2 weeks, everyone was obsessed with making sure no one would notice they're wearing the same jeans. I mean, it's a jean, it's not like a t-shirt, so maybe that's easy to recognize. But by the end, people got used to their jeans and didn't find that it was important to wash it, and it influenced all of their other washing practices. So it was a small example of how to bring people together to challenge normative assumptions around cleanliness. Now, laundry is not the most energy-consuming category in the home. So for the next project, which was a European project, we did laundry, because it's still fun to talk about cleanliness and hygiene. It makes people, it's an interesting sociological topic, but we also looked at heating. And we encourage people to reduce their indoor heating to 18 degrees. So what do you heat your homes at here in the winter? What are you at? Depends on your house, I guess, right? And what kind of heating system you have. And I know Armenia has gone through periods in history where you couldn't even heat your homes, no? People were burning trees in the city just to stay warm. But what would you say an average house is heated today? Does it really depend a lot, or what would you
Depends
say?
on the basically the territory of the house, the area. I think.
Yeah. There's some very poorly insulated homes.
It also depends on individuals.
It also depends on what you're used to, yeah. So, well, we recruited 400 households across Europe, and we gave them these little kits, which were not meant to directly reduce their heating needs, but nonetheless to talk about, the whole idea was heating bodies and not spaces. I can say the same thing for cooling. So it's like, how do you dress differently in the winter when you're indoors? And how do you heat yourself in your bed with a different cover and all this kind of stuff, rather than thinking of heating the whole space? And we challenged normative assumptions around heating and clothing. So we would say, yeah, this is a picture of someone in December. What are expectations around dressing indoors? You know, so some people all year round are wearing a t-shirt, right? Even if it's very cold, because they like to be hot indoors. So working with people and through this challenge, we're able to reduce across all the countries, 8 countries involved, starting, so it's, we account for outdoor temperatures, so it's corrected for outdoor temperatures, but over several weeks, most all were able to reduce their indoor temperatures. Not everyone got below 19, but many. We came at an average of about 1 to 1.5 degrees per household in reduction, and that's about 6 to 12% of energy savings, which is not insignificant. So this is, for example, for the bedroom, people were able to go much lower than shared rooms. So for sleeping, people saw benefits of being able to reduce their indoor temperature and sleep better. But they didn't do this through an information campaign. It wouldn't have worked. They did it through a challenge where they had to agree, to a target, where they worked together with others, where they had, different sessions talking about different dimensions of energy usage. So I do a lot of these kinds of workshops, and we can critique workshops. Sometimes there's spaces where elitism is reinforced. But this was another European project as a follow-up to the Energize one I just mentioned. And it was okay, we can get people to work on their own energy usage at home, more or less energy for heating and laundry, but what about people thinking about energy strategies and climate change strategies for their neighborhood, for the towns that they live in? And here, people came up with their own action plan for thinking about energy sufficiency, etc. And we did this also in several countries in Europe. The big project I'm running right now is on summer comfort. This is a neighborhood in Geneva where we modeled extreme heat during the heat wave. And we work with multiple different stakeholders to try and imagine not only how you can change infrastructure, as we said before, to bring in more green and shading and all this. Do you know what I did? I brought to the city of Geneva the example of Yerevan's, those hydro vaporizers. I love that. In a context where you have access to water, it's such a cooling device. They do it in Switzerland, but in Geneva they've experimented it, but in punctual spaces. So you go to like a corner, and there's a vaporizer in the corner, and I was like, no, it should be tied to mobility. People aren't going to walk like, oh, I'm going to go stand next to this vaporizer for 5 minutes. No. In Yerevan, you're walking across the street and you're getting this cool sensation. So you'll be happy to know I brought that example to the city of Geneva. But all of this speaks to ways of thinking about changing everyday life dynamics, moving beyond individual change to think of broader system dynamics. A lot of my work, as you've seen, is about contesting normative assumptions of what it means to be comfortable, what it means to live a good life, having those conversations, and trying to do it as much as possible in a participatory fashion. The more different perspectives you bring to a given problem, the richer the possible solutions you can bring forward. So that's it. I had some discussion points, but I think we were exchanging all throughout, and I wanted to tell you about a master's program I run at the University of Geneva, an English language program in the social sciences faculty. It's called Sustainable Societies and Social Change. And every year we welcome some 20 students from around the world. We'd love for some of you to apply, and if you do consider applying, drop me a line, or I'm easier to reach sometimes on LinkedIn, because I get so many emails. But application deadlines are end of February, and come and talk to me after class if you want to hear more about that program. And that's it. This is a book where we talk about sufficiency and consumption. It's available in open access, and I really enjoy reading all of you. So thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time.